Take your hand off her. The words weren't loud, but they sliced through the laughter outside the downtown charity gala like a cold wind. Every conversation nearby seemed to stall for a heartbeat. Victoria Hayes slowly turned toward the stranger who had spoken. The man wore worn work boots, faded jeans, and a dark work jacket with grease stains across one sleeve. He didn't look nervous. He didn't look impressed either. He simply stood there between her and the well-dressed businessman who had refused to accept her polite rejection. The businessman forced a smile. This doesn't concern you. Ethan Walker held his ground. She already gave you her answer. Silence settled over the sidewalk. People glanced at one another, waiting to see who would back down first. Victoria had attended more charity events than she could count. Expensive suits, perfect smiles, endless introductions. Men who spoke to her title before they spoke to her. Men who saw opportunity before they saw a person. Tonight had started exactly the same. Until now. The businessman finally raised both hands with an irritated shrug. Fine. Have it your way. He turned and disappeared into the crowd without another word. The tension dissolved, but nobody moved right away. Victoria looked at Ethan, expecting the familiar expression she had seen 1,000 times. Recognition, curiosity, ambition. Instead, he gave a small nod as if confirming everything was over. You okay? He asked. Yes, she answered quietly. Thank you. Good. He offered a polite smile. Have a nice evening. Then he simply walked away. Victoria blinked. No request for a photo. No awkward attempt to continue the conversation. No business card. No flirtation. Just quiet kindness followed by quiet departure. She watched him cross the street toward an aging pickup truck parked beneath a flickering streetlight. Before climbing inside, he noticed a little girl asleep against the passenger window, hugging a stuffed rabbit almost as old as the truck itself. His tired face softened instantly. He opened the door with careful hands, adjusted a small blanket around her shoulders, and brushed a loose strand of hair away from her forehead. Before closing the door as gently as possible, Victoria found herself staring longer than she intended. The image stayed with her even after the truck disappeared into late-night traffic. Behind her, one of her executives hurried over. Ms. Hayes, the board has been looking everywhere for you. She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes remained fixed on the empty street where the pickup had vanished. Who was that man? She asked. The executive frowned. I don't know. Victoria nodded slowly, though something inside her refused to let the moment go. She had spent years learning how to read people within seconds. Yet somehow, the only man who had asked nothing from her had become the one person she couldn't stop thinking about. By the following morning, she would make a decision that surprised even herself, and it would quietly begin changing both of their lives. The next morning, Victoria Hayes canceled a lunch meeting that had been on her calendar for 3 months. Her assistant looked up in surprise. You have investors flying in from Seattle. Victoria closed the folder in front of her. Reschedule them for tomorrow. Is everything all right? Victoria hesitated before answering. There is someone I want to meet. Less than an hour later, her driver pulled up across the street from Walker Auto Repair, a modest garage tucked between a family diner and a hardware store. There were no polished marble floors, no glass towers reaching into the sky, only the familiar scent of motor oil, the steady hum of impact wrenches, and the sound of classic rock drifting from an old radio sitting on a dusty shelf. Victoria stepped out wearing jeans, a simple sweater, and sunglasses instead of the tailored suits that usually announced her arrival long before she spoke. Ethan was kneeling beside an aging pickup truck, tightening a bolt beneath the hood. He glanced up when he heard footsteps. For a brief second, recognition crossed his face. Then he smiled politely. Morning. Good morning, Victoria replied. I hope I am not interrupting. Depends, Ethan said with a faint grin. Are you bringing another guy who cannot take no for an answer? Victoria laughed before she could stop herself. It had been a long time since someone had made her laugh without trying. No, I came because I never really thanked you. Ethan wiped his hands with a clean shop towel. You already did. I do not think I did enough. He shrugged. Sometimes enough is just saying thank you. Before Victoria could answer, a cheerful little voice called from inside the office. Dad, I finished my homework. A young girl with light brown hair stepped outside carrying a colorful backpack almost as big as she was. She stopped when she noticed Victoria. Hi. Hi. Victoria answered with a warm smile. Ethan motioned toward her. This is my daughter, Lily. Lily studied Victoria for a second before asking the question children always seemed brave enough to ask. Are you Dad's friend? Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. We just met. Victoria knelt so she could look Lily in the eye. I think we are still figuring that out. Lily smiled with complete sincerity. That is okay. New friends are nice. She skipped toward a picnic table near the garage, pulling crayons from her backpack while humming softly to herself. Victoria watched her for a moment. She is wonderful. Ethan's expression softened. She makes every day easier. A customer walked over carrying an invoice. Ethan, I cannot pay the full amount until next Friday. Ethan glanced at the paper, then folded it in half. Take care of your family first. We will figure it out later. The customer stared at him. Are you sure? Absolutely. The man thanked him twice before driving away. Victoria remained silent. She had spent years negotiating contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Yet she had rarely seen generosity offered so quietly. Ethan looked back at her. Sorry about that. Where were we? Victoria realized she had almost forgotten why she came. For the first time in years, she was standing beside someone who seemed completely untouched by her wealth, her influence, or her last name. She left the garage an hour later without mentioning she was the chief executive officer of Hayes Technologies, and as her car pulled away, she caught Ethan waving goodbye with the same easy smile he had given every customer that morning. She could not explain why, but keeping her identity a secret suddenly felt more important than revealing it. Over the next several days, Victoria found herself inventing reasons to drive across town. Sometimes she arrived with a question about a strange noise in her car. Sometimes she stopped by carrying coffee from the diner next door. Ethan accepted every visit with the same quiet courtesy, never asking why she kept returning. One cool Thursday afternoon, she placed 2 paper cups on his workbench. I guessed black coffee, she said. Ethan looked up from the engine he was repairing. You guessed right. He accepted the cup with a grateful smile. That is either impressive or lucky. Maybe a little of both. They stood in comfortable silence while the late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the garage floor. It surprised Victoria how peaceful the place felt. Nobody rushed to impress anyone. Nobody cared about expensive watches or corner offices. Every person who walked through the garage door was treated exactly the same. A few minutes later, Lily came running from the office carrying a sheet of construction paper covered with colorful crayons. Dad, look. Ethan smiled immediately. What have you got there? My family project. Lily held up the drawing proudly. Victoria noticed 3 stick figures standing beneath a bright yellow sun. One was clearly Ethan. One was Lily. The third figure had long blonde hair. Ethan chuckled softly. Who is the third person? Lily looked toward Victoria without hesitation. Her. Victoria blinked in surprise. Me? Lily nodded. You smile like you belong here. Ethan laughed awkwardly. Careful, kiddo. We just met. Lily shrugged with the simple confidence only children seem to possess. Sometimes that is enough. Victoria accepted the drawing when Lily offered it to her. Can I keep this for a while? Lily beamed. Yes, but do not fold it. Victoria smiled. I promise. She carefully slid the picture into her leather notebook, making sure the corners stayed perfectly flat. As the afternoon continued, another customer pulled into the garage with an older sedan that refused to start. The elderly driver stepped out looking embarrassed. I think this old thing finally gave up on me. Ethan spent nearly 30 minutes checking the battery and replacing a worn cable. When the engine finally started, the man reached for his wallet. Ethan gently pushed his hand away. Buy dinner for your wife instead. The older man stared at him. You worked hard for this. Ethan smiled. So did you. After the man drove away, Victoria quietly asked, Do you always do that? Ethan leaned against the truck beside him. Not always. Just when someone needs a break more than I need another invoice. She studied his face. There was no pride in his answer. No expectation of praise. It sounded as ordinary to him as commenting on the weather. That evening, Victoria returned to her penthouse overlooking the city skyline. She placed Lily's drawing on the kitchen counter before taking off her shoes. Her phone buzzed with messages from board members, investors, and reporters requesting meetings. She ignored every notification. Instead, she unfolded the picture again. Her fingers gently smoothed one tiny corner that had started to curl upward. A small smile crossed her face before fading into quiet thought. The next morning, Her chief of staff walked into her office carrying a thick folder. "We finished the background check you requested." Victoria looked at the folder without touching it. Somehow, opening it felt like crossing a line she could never uncross. After a long pause, she finally reached forward, unaware that the first page inside would challenge almost everything she believed she knew about the quiet mechanic who had walked away without asking for anything in return. Victoria rested her hand on the folder for several long seconds before opening it. She had asked for a routine background check, expecting little more than employment records and a credit history. Instead, the first page showed a photograph of Ethan standing beside a much younger Lily at a community food drive. Neither of them was receiving help. They were handing out boxes to families waiting in line. Victoria slowly turned another page. There were no lawsuits, no criminal record, no hidden business. Partnerships. The report painted the picture of an ordinary man who worked long hours, paid every bill on time, volunteered whenever he could, and had quietly declined several financial assistance programs after his wife passed away. Her chief of staff spoke carefully. "We also found something unusual." Victoria looked up. "What is it?" 3 years ago, he sold his project car. According to public records, he used every dollar to cover medical expenses for a neighbor's son. Victoria lowered her eyes to the file again. "Did anyone report it?" "No. We only found it because of the property transfer documents." The room fell silent. She had spent years surrounded by carefully managed public images. Charity galas, press releases, social media campaigns. Ethan had never invited a camera. Later that afternoon, Victoria drove back to the garage without scheduling the visit. She found Ethan replacing brake pads while an old country song played softly from the radio. He glanced toward her and smiled. "Your car making strange noises again?" "No." She smiled back. "I just had time for coffee." "That is a better reason." They walked next door to the small diner where the waitress greeted Ethan by name before filling his mug without asking. "The usual?" she asked. "Please." She turned toward Victoria. "And for you." "The same." As they settled into a booth by the window, Victoria noticed several customers wave at Ethan. He knew nearly everyone. More importantly, they seemed genuinely happy to see him. "You have lived here a long time," she said. Ethan nodded. "Almost my whole life. Everyone seems to know you." He laughed quietly. "Small towns are like that. You cannot hide for very long." Their breakfast arrived. For a few minutes, they simply enjoyed the quiet comfort of warm coffee and fresh pancakes. Then Victoria asked the question that had lingered in her mind ever since reading the report. "Why do you help so many people?" Ethan looked out the window before answering. "Because there were days when I needed help too." He stirred his coffee slowly. "Some people were there for Lily and me when life became difficult. I never forgot that." Victoria studied his face. He said nothing more. He did not describe his loss. He did not ask for sympathy. The silence carried more weight than a long explanation ever could. When breakfast ended, Ethan reached for the check. Victoria stopped him. "This one is on me." He smiled. "Only if I get the next one." "You are already planning another breakfast?" "Seems fair." She smiled without realizing it. "Fair enough." As they walked outside, Lily came running from the garage carrying a small flower she had picked near the fence. She handed it to Victoria with both hands. "This one opened today." Victoria accepted it carefully as though it were something priceless. "Thank you." Lily grinned. Flowers always find the sunshine. The simple words stayed with Victoria long after she returned to the office. That evening, during a strategy meeting on the top floor of Hayes Technologies, one of her board members slid a glossy magazine across the conference table. A photograph on the cover showed Victoria leaving the neighborhood diner beside Ethan only hours earlier. The headline was impossible to ignore, and for the first time, their quiet world was no longer invisible. Victoria looked around the boardroom without touching the magazine lying in front of her. Every executive at the table had already seen the cover. Nobody spoke until Richard Coleman, the oldest member of the board, cleared his throat. "Victoria, investors notice these things." She met his eyes calmly. "A photograph of me having breakfast? A photograph of you with someone the media cannot identify." Another executive leaned forward. "Perception matters." Victoria folded her hands. "Character matters more." The room fell quiet. She gathered the magazine, thanked everyone for their time, and ended the meeting 10 minutes earlier than planned. As the elevator carried her down from the 50th floor, she caught her reflection in the polished steel doors. For years, she had built a reputation for making difficult decisions without hesitation. Yet somehow, the opinion of one quiet mechanic mattered more than another successful quarter. Across town, Ethan had no idea his face was beginning to circulate through business circles. His afternoon was spent replacing a transmission before helping Lily practice multiplication tables during a slow hour. 7 times 8. Ethan asked with a smile. Lily squeezed her eyes shut dramatically. 56. You almost sounded surprised. She laughed. I was. They both laughed together until a familiar voice interrupted them. Am I interrupting homework? Victoria stood near the office door, holding a paper bag from the diner. Lily's face lit up immediately. You came back. I did. Victoria reached inside the bag and placed 3 slices of homemade apple pie on the table. I thought we could all use dessert before dinner. Lily clapped softly. Best surprise ever. Ethan shook his head with an amused smile. You really did not have to do that. I know. She glanced toward Lily. I wanted to. As they shared pie around the small office table, the conversation flowed with surprising ease. Lily talked about school, Ethan shared stories about fixing old cars, and Victoria found herself laughing more than she had in weeks. At one point, Lily looked back and forth between the two adults. Can I ask something? Ethan smiled knowingly. You usually do. Why do grown-ups always look so serious? Victoria and Ethan exchanged a quick glance before laughing again. Ethan answered first. Sometimes we forget how to have fun. Lily nodded thoughtfully. You should stop forgetting. Victoria smiled at the little girl. That is probably the best advice I have heard all week. The peaceful moment lingered until Victoria's phone vibrated across the table. She glanced at the screen. 12 missed calls. 8 messages. 1 breaking news alert. She quietly turned the phone face down. Ethan noticed, but chose not to ask. Instead, he poured everyone another glass of iced tea. That simple act of respecting her silence somehow meant more than endless questions ever could. As the sun began to set, Victoria prepared to leave. Lily hurried over with a small envelope decorated in colorful marker. Do not open it until you get home. Victoria accepted it carefully. I promise. Ethan walked her to her car. Everything all right? He asked gently. She hesitated, searching for words she had not spoken in years. Sometimes life gets noisy. Ethan nodded toward the quiet neighborhood around them. Then come back whenever you need a little peace. She looked at him for several seconds before whispering, Thank you. On the drive home, she opened Lily's envelope at a red light. Inside was another drawing. This time the 3 figures were holding hands beneath the words, Friends always find each other. Victoria smiled through misty eyes just as another notification appeared across her dashboard screen. Someone had finally identified Ethan by name, and the story spreading across the internet was only beginning. By sunrise, the story had spread far beyond the city. News websites displayed the same photograph again and again. Some headlines questioned why one of the country's most respected chief executive officers had been spending time with an unknown mechanic. Others invented stories that had never happened. Victoria ignored every article until her communications director entered her office carrying a tablet. The board wants an emergency meeting. Victoria looked up calmly. Because I had breakfast? Because people are asking questions. She stood and picked up her blazer. Then we will answer the right ones. At nearly the same moment, Ethan unlocked the garage as he always did. He noticed several unfamiliar vehicles parked across the street. A man holding a camera lowered it the second Ethan looked his way. Another woman approached with a microphone. Mr. Walker, how long have you been seeing Victoria Hayes? Ethan frowned politely. I think you have the wrong idea. Are you dating? She continued. Ethan glanced toward Lily, who had just stepped out of the office with her backpack. He smiled at his daughter before answering. Today is a school day? Excuse us. He opened the passenger door for Lily exactly as he always did. Once she was buckled in, he drove her to school without saying another word to anyone waiting outside the garage. Lily looked out the window for a while before speaking softly. Daddy, yes. Why were those people taking pictures? Ethan kept his eyes on the road. Sometimes people become interested in things they do not understand. Lily nodded slowly. Will they go away? Ethan smiled, though it did not quite reach his eyes. Eventually, after dropping her off, he returned to find the reporters still waiting. He walked past them without anger or frustration and unlocked the garage door. One reporter called after him. "People say you are chasing a billionaire." Ethan stopped for a moment. He turned just enough to be heard. People can say whatever they want. It does not make it true. Then he disappeared inside. Across town, Victoria entered the boardroom where every seat was already filled. Richard Coleman folded his hands. "This situation is affecting public confidence." Victoria remained standing. "Public confidence in what?" "Your judgment." She looked around the room before answering. "My judgment built this company." Nobody interrupted. She continued quietly. "If sharing breakfast with a decent man raises questions, perhaps we are asking the wrong questions." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. After the meeting ended, Victoria walked alone through the company lobby. Employees greeted her as they always had, yet she noticed curious glances that had not been there before. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of other people's assumptions pressing against every step. That evening she drove toward the garage, hoping for the familiar peace she had begun to associate with the place. But when she arrived, the parking lot was empty. The service bays were closed hours earlier than usual. Taped to the office window was a simple handwritten sign. "Closed today. Family time." Victoria stood there holding Lily's drawing inside her notebook while the quiet evening settled around her. She suddenly realized the attention surrounding her life had already reached Ethan's world, and if she was not careful, the one place that had always felt safe might become the place that paid the highest price. The following morning, Ethan arrived at the garage before sunrise. The street was still quiet, and for a few precious minutes, everything felt normal again. He unlocked the front office, switched on the old coffee maker, and glanced at Lily's latest drawing taped beside the cash register. 3 smiling figures still stood beneath a bright yellow sun. He looked at it longer than usual before taking a slow breath. An hour later, his phone rang. "Mr. Walker?" a calm voice asked. "This is the principal at Lily's school. There is nothing to worry about, but I think it would be best if you came by when you have a chance." Ethan's heart tightened. "Is Lily okay?" "She is safe. We simply need to talk." 20 minutes later, Ethan sat across from Principal Harris while Lily quietly colored at a nearby table. "Some students recognized your picture online," the principal explained gently. "Children repeat things they hear from adults." Lily handled herself very well, but she looked overwhelmed. Ethan turned toward his daughter. She offered him a brave little smile that broke his heart more than tears ever could. On the drive home, neither of them spoke for several miles. Finally, Lily looked out the window and whispered, "Daddy, did I do something wrong?" Ethan immediately reached across the center console and gently squeezed her hand. "No, sweetheart. You did everything right." "Then why are people talking about us?" Ethan searched for words simple enough for an 8-year-old to understand. "Sometimes people create stories before they know the truth." Lily nodded slowly. "Will the truth catch up?" Ethan smiled softly. "It usually does. It just takes longer." That evening, Victoria stood alone inside her penthouse, staring at Lily's drawing resting on the kitchen counter. She had learned about the school incident only minutes earlier through a discreet call from a trusted advisor. For the first time since meeting Ethan, guilt settled heavily on her shoulders. Every headline, every photograph, every rumor had followed her into his quiet life. She picked up her phone several times to call him. Each time, she stopped before pressing his name. Near sunset, someone knocked on her apartment door. Her assistant handed over a plain white envelope with no return address. A courier dropped this off downstairs. Victoria recognized Ethan's handwriting before she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Thank you for your friendship. Lily and I are grateful for every kind moment you shared with us. But I think it is best if we keep some distance for a while. She deserves a quiet childhood, and right now I cannot give her that if this attention continues. Please do not blame yourself. You have only shown us kindness." Victoria read the letter twice before carefully folding it along its original crease. She did not cry. She simply lowered herself into a chair and stared through the floor-to-ceiling windows as the city lights slowly appeared one by one. Hours later, she drove to the garage anyway. The lights inside were off, but one small object rested on the office windowsill. It was the tiny flower Lily had given her only days earlier, now pressed carefully between 2 pieces of clear glass. Beside it sat a handwritten note with only 5 words. "Flowers always find the sunshine." Victoria closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them again, the sadness remained, but something stronger had begun to take its place. She finally understood that if she wanted Ethan back in her life, she could not wait for the world to change. She would have to be the one willing to stand where he had once stood for her. The annual shareholders' meeting filled the grand auditorium with polished shoes, tailored suits, and quiet conversations that carried more tension than excitement. Victoria stood backstage, holding Lily's drawing inside the same leather notebook where she had carefully protected it from the day it was given to her. She ran her fingers across the crayon sun in the corner of the page before closing the notebook. Her communications director approached cautiously. "There is still time to avoid questions. We can release a written statement instead." Victoria looked toward the stage entrance. "No, the market may not react well." She smiled gently. "I am not responsible for every reaction. I am responsible for telling the truth." Moments later, she walked onto the stage. The applause was polite but restrained. Investors, board members, reporters, and employees watched every movement. Richard Coleman stepped toward the podium first. "Before we begin today's agenda, there has been considerable public interest surrounding recent events." Victoria quietly touched his arm. "If you do not mind, I will address it myself." He nodded and stepped aside. Victoria looked across the room. Hundreds of faces stared back at her. She took one slow breath before speaking. "For weeks, people have asked why I spent time with a mechanic from a small neighborhood garage." She paused. Nobody moved. "The better question is why that surprises anyone." A few reporters immediately lifted their cameras. Victoria continued. "The first time I met Ethan Walker, he did not know my name. He did not know my profession. He did not know my bank account." Another quiet pause settled over the room. He simply saw someone who needed help. The auditorium grew so still that even the sound of a camera shutter seemed unusually loud. Since then, I have watched him treat strangers, customers, neighbors, and his daughter with the same respect he showed me that evening. He never asked for recognition. He never asked for money. He never asked for influence. In fact, he walked away every single time. She opened the notebook and held up Lily's drawing. "This was given to me by his daughter." She drew 3 people holding hands long before the newspapers invented their own version of our story. Soft murmurs spread across the audience before fading again. Victoria smiled at the drawing for a brief moment. A child who sees kindness without titles often understands people better than adults who only notice status. Richard Coleman lowered his eyes. Several board members exchanged thoughtful glances. Victoria closed the notebook. "Success has taught me many lessons. But the most important one did not come from a boardroom. It came from a father who reminded me that character cannot be measured by income, and respect is never determined by a job title." She stepped back from the microphone. No dramatic music followed. No prepared applause. For several long seconds, the room remained completely silent. Then one person slowly began clapping. Another joined. Within moments, the entire auditorium rose to its feet. The standing ovation continued long after Victoria lowered her head in quiet gratitude. Outside the building, news alerts spread across the country, but Victoria ignored every notification. She had only one destination in mind. As sunset painted the sky in warm shades of gold, she parked outside Walker Auto Repair once again. The garage lights were on for the first time in days. Through the open service bay, she saw Ethan looking up from an engine as if he had sensed someone standing there. Neither of them spoke. Yet in that quiet moment, both of them understood that the hardest conversation of their lives was only just beginning.